it's a threat if you're not a great host. You're going to get booted out pretty quickly.
Today, I'm excited to be here with Cory Friedman. He's the owner and founder at the ShoreHouse Collection in Miami, Florida. You've grown into a solid full-service vacation rental property management operation. You started, though, by being essentially accepted in the beta phase of the co-hosting marketplace, which allowed you to take over and grow relatively fast. And even though you're a full-service property manager, you're within that co-hosting marketplace, you're number one co-host in the Miami area. If you were to start your operation all over again with what you know today, what would you do differently?
Standardize as much as you can. If you're looking to grow, if you're looking to have one rental, two rentals, three rentals, doesn't really matter, right? But if you're looking to have 5, 10, 30 rentals, right, you're going to drive yourself crazy. And that's what I did.
If we take a step back, when you view what Airbnb is trying to do with these different programs, and especially the co-hosting marketplace as a partner with Airbnb, what do you think they're trying to accomplish?
This is all a revenue game at the end of the day. And how do you make revenue?
What do you think are some things that we still have to learn as vacation rental operators from the way that hotels manage to achieve that level of standardization that you're referring to?
I think we have to
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hospitality Edge podcast, where we bring together what we think are two sides of the same coin, real estate and hospitality, and where we aim to bring together entrepreneurs, investors, founders, leaders, operators in the hospitality and vacation rental space so they can tell us about their stories, their lessons that they have learned along the way, as well as maybe some of the mistakes they have learned so we don't have to make those same mistakes ourselves. Today, I'm excited to be here with Cory Friedman. He's the owner and founder at the ShoreHouse Collection in Miami, Florida. Cory, how are you doing today? Thank you for taking the time.
Great. It's a beautiful sunny day here in Miami, so can't complain.
Yeah, I can imagine. Last time I was in Miami, I was surprised for the IMN conference how chilly it was for Miami. It was actually quite chilly. Yeah, I wasn't expecting that. But anyway, Cory, let's see. Before we get into your story, the topics we want to cover, why don't you tell us, if you were to start your operation all over again with what you know today, what would you do differently, if anything?
There's one thing that comes to mind of one thing that I would do differently, but as a amalgamation of everything, right? Of all the mistakes I've made, right? Some of those mistakes you have to make because you have to learn from those mistakes in business, right? That helps you grow. So a lot of the things that I maybe did wrong or didn't do right, it sits well with me that those mistakes were made because I had to make them. But the one thing, if I could tell myself, right, is standardize as much as you can. If you're looking to grow, if you're looking to have one rental, two rentals, three rentals, doesn't really matter, right? But if you're looking to have 5, 10, 30 rentals, right, you're going to drive yourself crazy. And that's what I did. You know, I was driving myself crazy. And let's talk about really quickly, not just the standardization of products like your water glasses, your soap, you know, all that kind of stuff, but also the standardization of your contracts that you have with owners or hosts, right? Because I was kind of like letting my arm be pulled in different directions to whatever the owner wanted or whatever the host wanted. So some people would have, you know, different out clauses. Some people would say, hey, I like my coffee maker that I have, but we require current coffee makers. But just to get that contract, I would say, fine, you know, we'll do the drip coffee maker you have, right? But now I have to go out and buy different products for this different coffee maker, right? And it starts to, you know, pull you in many different directions, and it's not possible to do. So you have to stand firm, you know, when it comes to contracts and the standardization of those contracts.
Yeah, and you have a background where, I mean, you come from the hotel world where, you know, there's a lot of standardization, right? And I'm sure that's where you see the difference between the way we do things in the vacation rental space, the way the hotel industry does things. Of course, there's similarities, but there's some differences as well. But what do you think are some things that we still have to learn as vacation rental operators from the way that hotels manage to achieve that level of standardization that you're referring to?
I think we have to buy the same products. We have to use the power of wholesalers, and sometimes it's not the wholesaler, sometimes it's Amazon. Nowadays sometimes Amazon is your best friend because wholesalers even have gone up in price. But you know one of my bosses one time, and this was obviously at one of our corporate hotels, it wasn't at a boutique hotel, but one of my bosses one time, he was like, you can never cut a corner no matter what it is in a hotel. There's no cutting corners. You everything has to be done the right way.
Hmm.
And at first when he said it, I was young. I was like, yeah, I know, don't cut corners, don't, like do something half-ass or whatever, but it what when I became older and more mature within the hospitality industry, it really meant a lot more to me. And I actually took that with me to this day. And for example, if we run out sometimes, like I won't have a bottle of the little conditioner in my car, right? Since then, by the way, we've switched to dispensers because dispensers are much easier to manage than the little, hotel bottles. So sometimes we would run out of maybe one, and we wouldn't have it to put in the unit, right? I would run all the way back to my storage, even if, let's say, a vacation rental guest doesn't really care. You tell them, hey, forgot a bottle of conditioner, I'll come bring it tomorrow, right? Probably wouldn't care about it. But it's the experience, right? So it's setting up the idea. When you walk into that room, you have clean white linens tucked perfectly into the bed. You have the hotel amenities all set up nicely. So it's the experience that the guest is getting. And it's a little surprise and delight, right? So that you add to it. We add like fresh croissants is kind of like our signature thing that we put into all of our units, most of them, snacks, beverages, things like that are free to the guest. And with that experience, maybe we've pared stuff down over the years, but we haven't lost focus of what our main brand identity is, which is, this kind of updated experience of what a vacation rental should be.
That's super interesting, and I love that. By the way, the mindset of not cutting corners and the mindset of even if maybe it would be okay for me not to have this when the guest checks in or whatnot. Just having that mindset of no, it has to be there. We have to aim for excellence as much as possible, and so I really like that mindset. Let's talk a little bit about how you got started in the space, because you've grown into a solid vacation rental, full service vacation rental property management operation. You started though by being essentially accepted in the beta phase of the co-hosting marketplace, which allowed you to take over and grow relatively fast. And even though you are a full service property manager, you're within that co-hosting marketplace, you're number one co-host in the Miami area. So let's talk a little bit about how you got introduced to this in the first place, and how that process began, and then we'll talk a little bit about what the differences between co-hosting and property management are.
Yeah, so the I became a partner with Airbnb through the Superhost Ambassador program. That is basically an onboarding program for new hosts, right? So Airbnb pays us to onboard new hosts. Typically, in the beginning phases of the program, we would get people from Africa, from England, California, Hawaii, Japan, all over the place, right? But we're now regionalized. But I'll still get people outside of Miami, but I would say 95% of the people I get are from Miami. And that program kind of works together with the co-hosting marketplace. When the co-hosting marketplace opened, they looked at a lot of the Superhost ambassadors. Now there's, I don't know, probably across the US and Canada, there's probably maybe like 100 or 200 of us max. And they looked to the Superhost ambassadors and said, hey, why don't you guys if you're interested, come over to the co-host marketplace. So, now we're with two partnerships with Airbnb, whereas the first one, we were making a set commission off of, how many hosts listed and got their first guest. And the second partnership is more like a full blown business, right? Because you now have access to potential hosts and owners that are like, hey, I'm setting up my house. I have no idea who's going to run this place for me. Here's Airbnb backed hosts that I can choose from this marketplace and add on to my listing right here and there.
Mm.
So that's really how things were able to expand. And I was slowly expanding on my own, but this is more kind of like, a much bigger thing that happened, where a lot more people are now inquiring about, our services and things like that. And there's only about, within the Miami area, there's only about, maybe, I haven't checked in the last like month or two, but there's probably about like 10 of us. So yeah, that's how that started.
And if we take a step back, and when you view what Airbnb is trying to do with these different programs, and especially the co-hosting marketplace that you're mentioning here, the latest, the second program you joined as a partner with Airbnb on, what do you think they're trying to accomplish? What do you think is the strategy here? And what do you think that means for the vacation rental industry? What do you think that means for vacation rental operators and hosts and property managers? And how should people, and I'm sure you get this question a lot, be looking at this? Is it an opportunity? Is it a threat? Especially for the established operators. How do you think through this all?
Let me address the last thing you just said. Is it an opportunity or a threat? Depends who you are, right? If it's a threat, if you're not a great host, if you're just like a crappy host, you're gonna get booted out pretty quickly. There's some owners out there that don't really pay attention, so you might skirt by for a little bit. But this is all, a revenue game at the end of the day. And how do you make revenue? Typically, it's by your guest experience. It's your reviews, right? The algorithm is very important to us as hosts. So, with the co-host marketplace, yeah, it's a threat probably to bad hosts, but it's also an opportunity for everyone because, right, the vision of Airbnb, let's be real, a year or two ago, probably 2 years ago, I don't know exactly, but Airbnb had a really bad PR issue. And this came from the high fees and bad hosts. And we still have that issue today. And the fees, people are starting to get the point, but there was a small exodus from Airbnb. And the most important thing is that we have hosts in our communities that actually do a good job. They want to provide good guest service. They want to provide a good service to their owners or hosts. And, to me, that's what the co-host marketplace is. It's not a guaranteed, but let's say it's a more premium service that Airbnb is saying, hey, listen, guys, we're going to filter these people to you, pick from this list, and these are some good people to run your properties, right? So, I think Airbnb is saying, hey, we've got to get a grasp of this, and we have to make sure that we're providing at least something to people that have no idea how to get started, no idea how to host, and this is what the marketplace is today.
Yeah. I think, to your point, it strategically is very aligned with what they're claiming is their focus around quality of inventory, and hence the guest preferred badge, and hence the new policy that prevents you from, let's say, relaunching a listing if you have negative reviews in your original listing. And those things, I think that makes a lot of sense for what you're saying, as far as the co-hosting marketplace being a way for Airbnb to in either ensure quality, or at least make the odds of quality higher, since you're pairing non-sophisticated hosts and owners with more professional hosts and co-hosts that have proven to be good at what they do. What do you tend to find there mostly? Well, actually, before we get before we get there, what are the levels of co-hosting that Airbnb is allowing? Like, because sometimes use this term interchangeably, right? Co-host, property manager, and you and I were talking about how there's kind of like different levels of co-hosts. How do you see that? What are the different levels of co-hosts, and how does that differentiate itself from a property management company?
Yeah. So good question. So co-hosting on Airbnb could be one of many things. You can filter out whatever you need. When I'm in conversations with a new inquiry or a new lead, the first thing I say is, hey, what are your needs, right? Let them talk to me. Let them tell me what they need, because they might not know what they need, right? They may have on-site, a maintenance guy nearby that does all of their maintenance, and they don't need me to touch the maintenance. They just need me to text him when there's a problem, right? And that might lower our fee a little bit. So we can do anything from remote hosting to full service and even property management, which let's discuss the differences. But you know, as we had discussed, even Airbnb had a problem with understanding the difference between a co-host and property manager within our partner group when we have meetings and stuff. And everybody had a different answer. Most people were kind of with me on my side, where a property manager is somebody that manages the property as a whole, everything, right? So your landscaper, your pool guy, inside, outside of the house, trash, everything, right? Full service property management. Co-hosting is not necessarily the act of being a property manager. It's just being a co-host to a primary host on the listing. So that could mean many things. It could mean that you're also a property manager, but it could mean that you're just responding to guest messages, right? So there's different levels of being a co-host, and then look at being a property manager as kind of like, if you made it to the top, right? You're the full service guy for this property. But within the co-host marketplace, you can be one of, I think, 20 different things. You could offer interior designing for Airbnbs. Granted, there is some expectation of you being an actual co-host, so doing something within the listing on a operational basis, but there's many different aspects of being a co-host on Airbnb.
And within the co-hosting marketplace, is there a category two when it comes to full service property management, or that's kind of like something that's apart from the options provided by Airbnb, and it's just the place where you meet the owner, and then the relationship is continued directly.
Yeah, it's filtered. So like the owner, the host will select what they need. They may not. They may just send a blank
So there is an
inquiry,
option. There
right?
is an option. The host can say, the owner can say, I want a full service property manager within the co-hosting
Yes.
marketplace.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. That makes sense. So tell me something, Cory. When you're looking at scaling your business with, I think one of the challenges that I can guess might come from dealing with hosts that are, or with owners that are either new to this, or that are somewhat uneducated enough that they find the need to be looking for some help on this marketplace. I'm sure you must get all kinds of owners, all kinds of hosts. How have you managed to make sure that you don't take any kind of host or homeowner, as far as like, yeah, sure, you can accept an owner that needs help, that has a nice property, but if their lack of understanding of this industry is gonna lead to them setting unreasonable minimum rates with you, and you charge a commission, and then you're left with no ability to get bookings, like that's not a good owner to work with. So how have you managed to choose which owners to work with and which owners not to work with?
Yeah, it's funny. In the beginning, like I said, I was trying to get whoever I could. So we were really taking on properties that we probably shouldn't have. And that was one of those mistakes that I said you have to make, because I wouldn't have known. You would never have known, right? Standardization you can assume might be a good idea. You would never know, that growing to where you are today is and taking on these owners that just have their own idea about how to manage was a good idea. And with that, not recently, but a year or two ago, we had to fire some of our clients. We had to remove some of our listings from our inventory because they just weren't working out for us, whether it was the listing or the owner. And that's still going on to this day. We have a few listings that are kind of like teetering on the edge. But, you know, through all of that, one of the most important things that I've learned is and this is very recent, we had a lady contact us through the marketplace, and she was already very unorganized. It was an amazing contract, like amazing, like 20 units or 15 units. They were going to start us off with 10 at a very, very high end popular building here. I didn't want to get into the building originally with like 1 or 2 units just because the building's very difficult to get in and out and housekeeping and all that kind of stuff. But with the 10 units, I was like, oh my God, this is going to be amazing, right? This lady took on these units from another company, and she has zero experience. So she's already diluting her percentage to hire me, and she doesn't know what she wants to charge. We're back and forth. I'm telling her what we charge, and this is the minimum. And she's trying all these different ways to get us in, some of which I was kind of interested in. But every day I realized as we were getting closer and closer to agreeing to something, it was becoming more and more evident how unorganized she was and how she didn't know what she was doing. So, she already had 30, 40 reservations on the books, all of which had no idea about, that there were fees involved with daily resort fees at the property, about parking situation. I mean, nothing was given to these people. And to me, you know, I would say like, hey, if there was a way to find out who this owner is, contact the owner and be like, hey, kick this lady out, put me in. Not to be savage or anything,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
like
yeah.
I would do that. But I'm not going to work for this lady who has zero idea what she's doing and is going to just complicate my life more, right? So could I have probably tried harder? Yeah, but in that process, we were already dealing with a lot. So I can't take over these 10 units with somebody who's already causing major problems, right? So it was basically a goodbye. Here's a few other hosts you can try, and that's kind of the decision you have to make when you're sorting through these leads, right? Is does it make sense for you? Maybe that would have made sense for me if I spent more time on it, but I didn't have the time.
Hmm.
And there are many people that we have to turn down, probably more so than that we take on, because a lot of these are awful quality leads. And you get somebody that doesn't understand that, when you tell them, hey, sorry, this really isn't for me, here's a few, and I even give them a few other hosts that might be interested in taking it, but they're like diehard. They're like, hey, no, we want to work with you, and the unit is just disgusting. You can't take with the amount of brand new units selling at these one bedrooms selling at $150 a night in downtown Miami, midtown Miami, at these pre-construction places that just opened. You're not going to compete with this other unit that's maybe it's on the beach. Yeah, it does high occupancy, but the unit is disgusting and old, right?
Hmm.
So something for me that's important is that the unit is at least partially renovated, right? It can't be old, it can't be dingy. You can't have like these, the old bed skirts that they used to use at like, these limited service hotels, like different colored bed skirts and the bed cover. Nobody uses those anymore. It's all white now, right? It's a
Hmm.
marketing tactic for cleanliness, right? That hotels use. So, that is right. Like that's so important.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Corey, let's talk a little bit about that, right? Because at the end of the day, You're doing business in a market where there's a lot of inventory. There's a lot of conversations about there being saturation. There's people whose take on this is, well, commodity inventory is a thing of the past, and if you want to succeed in this game, you have to go experiential, you have to go large properties, maybe you have to even go like high end luxury type inventory. And yet there's people that are still doing well with commodity type inventory, but then it becomes even more important than ever to have some sort of element of differentiation, have an edge, when it comes to, like you were saying, making sure that the units are renovated, that the units are decently, maintained and taken care of. What are some of the things you do to make your listings stand out, or ensure that you'll be able to perform despite being in such a crowded market?
Yeah, and let me add to that by saying the market that I'm specifically in is the toughest, right? Because if you look at what Airbnb is today, our rentals, I would say 80% of them are high-end luxury condos. We have a few nice houses, we have a few other properties that are, like mid-scale, but we're really in the luxury higher end sector. And that's the toughest sector on Airbnb. Why? Because most people on Airbnb, they're looking for the best deal. They don't care that you're the nicest place. That comes into it as a factor, but if you look at data and you look at who's being booked the most, it's the economical guys. We have a fiveplex in Little Haiti, which is an up and coming area, but it's still low income, the area that we're in. And it's a fiveplex, and every single night is pretty much booked. We have three efficiencies, a 2 bedroom and a 3 bedroom. Every night is constantly booked at good rates. And I mean, they're low rates, but they're like much better than we expected. Now, I'm just struggling to fill, our higher end condos at what we had even when COVID ended, right? We had that huge boom during COVID. So how do I keep our like occupancy percentage in those condos above 85%? A lot of people disagree with me, but we recently had an owner. I'll give you an example. We recently had an owner. She got through me through the co-host marketplace. Thank God she was in one of our buildings that we're already in, which was great. And she did her homework. She looked at all my data on all the like sites and everything, and she picked out my units. And she said, Cory, can I ask you a question? How are all of your units the top revenue earners in these buildings? And I told her, I said, listen, well, one of the good factors is I was the first owner in this building, the specific building. And a few of the other owners caught wind of that, and they, had me start managing their units. So we were kind of first to market, if you will, right? But really, it's the algorithm. If you love the algorithm's going to love you back. So every single piece of the algorithm that I can meet, and we don't know what that is, we just assume what that is. So every single piece that I can meet to get me to the first page is what I want, right? Because I know, and the unit she's talking about, I leave at 25% higher, which is my personal unit, 25% higher than all my other units in the building. Not because I'm trying to gyp the owners or anything. It's just that's how it performs. So I can sell that unit 25% higher just because it's been in the building the longest. It has 200 something 5-star reviews, and it sits on page one all the time. So it will always get booked at 250 a night, where the others are at like 210 or 220 or whatever. So when we talk about how I distance myself from the inundation, right? I follow what Airbnb wants me to do. Some people don't like that. They're like, you're just, you like, suck up to Airbnb all the time. Yeah, that's what you got to do. This is business, right? So have the best pictures, right? Have the best description. Fill out everything in your listing and respond quickly, right? If you're responding quickly and you have a problem in your unit, 9 times out of 10, the guest isn't going to care. They just want somebody to respond, right? And now in case you didn't know, Airbnb is tracking your claims and your cases that are opened, whether it's from you or the guest. And they're taking that into account with your guest, the guest rating, right? The new badge on your
Yeah,
profile,
the guest
on your
favorite
listing,
badge. Yeah.
guest favorite badge, right? So that coincides with what they're doing on the technical side, right? So if you're getting, claims, or you're having complaints about your unit or something like that, you're going to start seeing problems with your listing getting booked. So, and listen, I see this stuff firsthand, and most of my units, they do great. But, the second one gets a 4 or 3 star, or there's a claim against it or something, you notice it, right? So meeting the algorithm and loving it, doing whatever you can to show it love is what I always tell anybody that I consult with, or any host. What's your best word of advice? Love the algorithm. You may not know what that means, but find out, because that is honestly like the number one thing that's going to keep you different from everybody else. And one more thing to add, I know I'm running on about this just because I love talking about it, but you know, there's guests from every walk of life that are staying in your units. And do I get frustrated? Of course I get frustrated. It's the industry, right? It tires you out. But I always think back, hey, if I'm in a foreign country, I'm in their land, right? Like I don't know their customs. I don't know how they are. So people come here, they ask very obvious questions. Let's just say use the word obvious. And I can put as much things in my details as possible. I can set up welcome messages, all this stuff to spoon feed the information to guests, and they will still ask every single question possible. And you have to remind yourself that sometimes people need that. And that is guest service. And you have to provide that sometimes. And and that will help, with your guest review score, and all those types of things. So when we think about guests staying from different cultures, different backgrounds, different countries, different upbringings, you have to think about all those things, not just in your communication, but in your unit as well. If you don't have a hot tea kettle, get one, because anybody from England will require that. Let me just tell
Hmm.
you that.
No, I love it. I love it. And I love what you said there about loving the algorithm and figuring out what it takes to show love to the algorithm. I get that there's people that are on the opposite side of this, thinking, oh well, I don't want to depend on Airbnb. I don't want my business to be at the risk of being eliminated by Airbnb. At the same time, the reality remains that even the major hotel brands haven't achieved true OTA independence, right? So there will always be a need for, even if you're the best at direct bookings, there will be a need for OTAs. And yes, there are the outliers that are digital marketing gurus and pros, and like, yes, they can find a way to bring their direct booking sort of percentage to the higher numbers, right? And I've met some people like that, and kudos to them. But what we don't talk a lot about is the cost of driving those direct bookings, right? And at the end of the day, the fact that we are competing on those marketing dollars with the OTA. So sure, get repeat guests to book direct if you can, but don't kill the golden goose. And the golden goose of where your first guest is going to come from will be the OTA. So play by those rules as much as possible. And I just want to point something out, because as I was telling you, we just came back from a trade show where we gave a conference on this topic, and we shared the stage there with Airbnb. And there's some data that we think is interesting, right? So percentage of listings that have a certain review score, right? And so what one of the things we notice is that there's more than 2 million listings that have a rating of over 4.9, representing 25% of the listings, whereas 60% of the listings have actual ratings that are higher than 4.8, and only the bottom 6% of listings have ratings under 4.5. So if you have anything under 4.5, forget about ranking, forget about being on the first page. And then if we take that one step further, we programmed a little bot, like a little screen scraping tool, to analyze the first 100 results of Airbnb searches. And we found that 70% of the listings that appear on the first 100 results have ratings that are higher than 4.7. And if we're looking at not just the first 100 results, but the first page, 85% of the listings that appear on the first page of search results have a rating that is higher than 4.7, right? So 85%, right? So in other words, you don't have 4.7 and plus, right? That's kind of like the real bare minimum. Forget about ranking, in the first page. Why would Airbnb show you, or any OTA show
Exactly.
you in the first page of search results, when there's people that are doing the work of ensuring quality? And it's not easy, Cory. So tell us about some ways in which you try to maintain those high levels of reviews, when we know how challenging that is, when we know how difficult sometimes guests can be, when we know that expectations are higher and higher than they have ever been, but yet we know that it's also more important than ever to have those high reviews.
Yeah, I think one of the primary things that a lot of hosts don't understand, and this is something that large companies are having problems with too, is you have a guest, they write you a complaint, and if you're a large company, you probably have somebody outsourced writing in your messages or something, especially if it's overnight. And their response times are 1 2 hours, right? Maybe if you're not a big company, you're just not really active host because you were told it's a set it and forget it model, you don't really respond at all, or you respond a day after. But some things people need pretty quickly, right? So let's just use toilet paper, for example. Is it a necessity? Yes. Can they pick it up at CVS? Yes. But we operate in an area where all of our units are, right? So we're inspecting the unit every single time. Doesn't matter how low end the unit is or high end the unit is, and by low end, I don't mean crappy. I just mean like, maybe the rate is lower.
Mm-hmm.
You still are giving your love to the unit, right? You're saying, hey, I love my guests, I love my listing, I love my owners, right? You're giving your love to this business. It's a lot. So you're going into the unit and you're checking everything. You're making sure everything is the way that you would want it to be if you walked into that unit. So if I see a hair, a little tiny hair on the bed sheet, yeah, I'm picking it up. That's part of the not cutting corners part, right? I could see tons of hairs while I'm doing an inspection. And, I'll text the housekeeper, hey, just FYI, next time, please make sure you're using the hair roller and all that kind of stuff, right? We have tools for them to use. So it's, again, wrapping the whole experience up for the guest in a tight little nice present with a bow on top, right? So that there aren't any problems. But right, problems do arise, right? And it's how you react to those problems. I'm not saying I'm like attached to my phone, but most of the time my phone's nearby, right? So I'm responding pretty quickly. I have a good team. If I'm not available to, somebody else is bound to get it. We make mistakes. Sometimes we let an hour go by and nobody's responded, but it's rare, very rare. And I think that's why we're like, hey, we don't want to be a 200 unit business. We're never going to keep the same quality if we grow this large, right? So for me, at least, that's a big part of it, right? Is the guest experience. On top of that, offering some sort of surprise and delight, right? That's kind of a term that we used in hospitality for a long time. We've used it in hotels. We used it when I worked for Brightline. And these are things that are, you don't advertise in the listing, you don't advertise on your website, and but you put in the room. So Some of our units, we put fresh fruit, we put snacks, bottled waters. Sometimes we put bubbly, the sodas, the sparkling waters. We also provide extra amenities. So like toothpaste kit, toothbrush kit, shaving kit, mouthwash, all those little things. But our signature thing, I think I mentioned it before, is we do fresh croissants every morning. So on your arrival day, you will have fresh croissants from a local bakery every single morning. And that's kind of our signature thing. And
Wow.
you you will not just with this business, but with any hotel I've ever worked in, any job I've ever worked where we did things like this, the value, the the perceived value skyrockets. It could cost you $5, $10 per unit. And the perceived value that the guest is getting goes from here to up here, right? And that's because it's something they weren't expecting. And they get in off of a late flight and they have some waters and some fresh croissants and they're like, oh my God, this is great. Or maybe they get in early the next morning and they're like, oh, we have breakfast, right? So those are, some things that we kind of do to keep our separation from other hosts and keep our, reviews high. And the last thing I'll say really quickly, because I know I tend to ramble, some things hosts don't really get is, besides from the response time, like of actually like responding to guests pretty quickly, there's the idea that this is my home or this is my place and you ruined a towel and I'm going to charge you for it, right? So mistakes happen. I get that. Some mistakes are bigger and other mistakes are smaller. If one towel is stained in my unit, am I going to charge the guest for it or file a claim? Absolutely not. It's going to cost me more in algorithm, however you want to say that, in an algorithm deduction to do that. I don't know if it will because, right, if the claim goes to me, right, I win it. I don't know how that works. I'm assuming though, if you as a host are constantly filing claims, Airbnb is probably not going to like it, right? So I pick and choose those things wisely. Sometimes I'll say, hey, you broke 2 wine glasses. Do you mind sending me $15 to recoup my loss? When you say it like that, you're saying, hey, I'm a small business, right? I lost some money on this. I don't make a lot of money. Can you help me? Most of the
Mm.
time, they just send me the money, right? But sometimes you have bigger claims, right? So yesterday, a guy left, a super nice guy, 25-star reviews, but it was one of my personal units and he damaged a chair that is like a $300 chair, like a really nice chair, right? Which typically I don't put in my units, but it has like wicker and stuff and it's really nice. So it was an accident. He put towels, blue towels that I guess were wet or something, and like put them on the chair, and they sat there for I guess a full day or I don't know what it needs to stain, and the whole wicker is now blue. And he's now telling us, oh, I don't know, like I don't think it was us, even though he already kind of admitted it. He's like, well, let me know if you can get the stain out, and whatever. And I have to. We weren't able to get the stain out, and so I said, hey, we need to recoup our money on this. I'm really sorry. The chair's $300, and I saw he read it, and he hasn't responded yet. But I'm assuming he's gonna put in a claim, deny it, and all this stuff, right? But you have to really pick and choose your battles, right? If
Yeah.
it's a 1 wine glass,
No,
1 towel, am I charging? No,
I
it's a
love it.
cost
It's
doing
gonna it's gonna
business.
it's gonna cost you way more, as you said, in terms of like the way it's gonna hurt your visibility, even if the claim does go through. Just the fact that the guest might not leave as good of a review, because of that. And I love also what you said about the way in which you ask for those, can make all the difference. Cory,
Yeah,
this has been great. I love how practical we went. I love how tactical we went. We really share a lot of the same mindset around how hospitality should be delivered. I could keep you here for 2 more hours, Cory. I think there would be way more topics for us to get through. Unfortunately, yeah, we have to get going. I have to let you go, but I want to thank you for your generosity, Cory, with your time. This has been great, and I'm sure insightful for many, inspirational for others as well. So thank you so much, Cory, for taking the time. It was a pleasure to have you on.
Thanks for having me, Sebastian. I appreciate it.
Have a good one.